Chapter 21, Daughter of Phobos. Phobos had always been in a precarious position. The unwanted moon of Mars. The now rich child, reaping the rewards of long years as an outcast. It was a strange place in a no doubt unique position, able to leverage its newly found advantages, but wary of doing too much and earning the attention of the true big players in the solar system. Ivil couldn't help but wonder if that kind of thing was what encouraged Aurora to move away from her homeworld. Was she chasing opportunities, or running away from trouble? In any case, she imagined she might find out before the end of the day. Sonic led the way to the room where the tea party was to be had. She walked with a slight bounce to her step. It was hard not to in the extremely low gravity in the ship. Sonic reached the last bulkhead, then paused before it. "Are you ready, ma'am?" she asked. Sonic had already gathered a few things for the ritual. A large plastic container filled with water, and a box made of lacquered wood with a few inlays upon it. No doubt the box was worth its weight in precious metals, seeing as how wood was often more precious than gold. "I'm ready," Ivil said with a nod. The door was pushed open, and Ivil scanned the room as she entered it. Aurora was there already, which she had known for some time. It was hard not to notice the woman, especially as she had a few cores that Ivil could sense. The room itself was nothing too special. It was alongside the cockpit, with another bulkhead door leading into the ship's command room. The front had a narrow but tall window looking out into empty space, and the center of the room had a small, fixed table, surrounded by magnetized stools. "Hello, Miss Sterlingworth," Sonic said as she moved closer to the table. Aurora smiled in greetings. "Hello, Savant Pendergast," she said, addressing Sonic by her title. "And Miss Vil as well." "Just Evelyn, please," Ivil replied as she took the stool next to Aurora, a hand swiping beneath her legs to adjust her skirt. She was not fond of skirts, especially in a low-gravity environment, but she could admit that a pencil skirt did suit her figure. Aurora looked at her, then nodded. "Evelyn, then. And of course you'll call me Aurora?" "Certainly," Ivil replied. This was going better than she'd feared. At least, so far. "I shall now begin the ritual," Sonic said. "Please, feel free to talk and enjoy each other's company during these early phases." "Thank you," Aurora said. Ivil nodded along, then watched as Sonic started to withdraw tools and equipment from within her outfit. It rapidly became obvious that she wasn't hiding the fact that she had a number of cores suitable to the task of either miniaturizing items or storing them in pocket space. She stared, then nodded to herself. Pocket space, definitely. The table soon had a cloth draped over it in the deep red of the Adeptus and Celia, then several small sets of cutlery were placed before each sitting area. That was followed by a metal plate placed in the center of the table onto which more items were placed. Everything clicked into place, and it was clear that every item was magnetized. "What sort of tea will we be enjoying?" Aurora asked. "Martian oolong," Sonic said. "Cultivated in the walking cathedral of St. George the Dust Slayer." "Impressive," Aurora said with the same tone Ivil might expect from a tourist entirely unaware of why something was impressive to begin with. Ivil didn't blame her. Sonic placed the last of her things onto the table, then without much pomp, began the ritual. It started when she opened the little box and removed a small glass jar filled with loose tea leaves. She extracted 3 small tablespoons from the jar and placed them within a small stainless container. Then she poured some water into an electric kettle and hummed while it started to boil. Before placing the tea leaves within a second glass kettle, Sonic poured some of the almost boiling water within it and swirled it about. She then poured the water out. "What is that for?" Ivil wondered. "I think it's to avoid the coolness of the kettle from impacting the tea. Essentially preheating the kettle," Aurora said. "Or something like that. I'll admit that while I've spoken to several on Celia, they aren't as common a sight on Phobos as they might be on Mars." "Really? I would have suspected otherwise. The Ancelia seem a lot more capable when it comes to handling the difficult living conditions of Phobos. Or, pardon me, the previously difficult conditions." Aurora shook her head. "No, you don't need to worry so much about that," Miss V-Evelyn. I'm well aware that Phobos was not always paradise. We still have unfortunate amounts radiation, and the moon's surface is still dangerous. But yes, the Ancelia has always been a boon. They can, and do, go everywhere on the moon, and their presence is very welcome. But not enough for you to seek out one for a partner? Ivil asked. Aurora blinked, then she blushed quite prettily. Ah, no, not really. I'm a very busy woman, and while the Ancelia is a wonderful group, I can't help but think that they would not be a good fit for me. Oh? Ivil asked. She glanced over to Sonic, and was pleased to note that the mate seemed entirely focused on her task. Why not? Aurora's blush deepened. They are just so. She struggled for words. Different? From most other people. Their minds are different. Not bad, but not the same. Ivil had a few choice words about how different someone could be and still be compatible, but she held back. Forgive me if this is intrusive, but are you married, Aurora? Not yet, Aurora said. But there are several suitors interested in me. It's one of the reasons I'm traveling to Callisto right now. My father and mother have arranged a few meetings. Ah, I see, Ivil said. She wasn't particularly surprised, nor did she know why she was disappointed. She was aware that the young woman was wealthy and that her family was influential. The thought of an arranged marriage was. She could hardly claim that it was unheard of, but it didn't appeal to her. Ivil reached over and gently touched Aurora's shoulder. You're a very attractive woman. I'm certain the suitors must be clamoring after you. Aurora's blush, which had just been receding, re-emerged with a vengeance. Ivil held back a smile. She had rarely met someone so quick to become flushed. Most of the people she dealt with were more military-minded, where shows of emotion were a weakness. Aurora had all of the control of a flustered teenager, but Ivil found it rather cute, instead of the annoyance it usually was. The tea was made, and the scent of oolong wafted through the air. The ritual continued, with the kettle and its contents placed on a heat-proof pad in the center of the table, and then a plate was added with some food. Small sandwiches and some tiny pastries, which were all carefully crafted. Thank you, Ivil said as Sonic poured into the cup before her, then went on to fill Aurora's and her own. I don't think I've ever enjoyed this type of tea before. It smells wonderful. The tea can be moderated with honey or cream. The honey is imported from Earth, the cream from Luna, Sonic said. No Martian honey or cream? Ivil asked. They are both inferior, Aurora said. For all that Mars is a behemoth, there are several things that the world lacks. Luxury agriculture is one of those. It's one of the other reasons for my trip to Jupiter's moons. Do they do things better? Ivil asked. Some things, yes, Aurora said. A lot of the moons in the solar system find themselves needing to focus on a specific niche. Making, creating, or processing something unique to them that they can sell to the rest of the system. Moons cannot stand alone, unlike the inner planets. Ivil nodded along. It wasn't as if Aurora was sharing some amazing new discovery. The truth was obvious enough. The planets had it good, the rest could muddle along. She did appreciate Aurora's willingness to share her thoughts. Across from her, Sonic was sitting, steaming cup placed before her, a small pastry next to it. Her hands on her lap while she stared. She was very pointedly not moving the doll mask she wore to taste her own tea. Ivil took a sip. It was hot enough that it might have burnt someone less resilient. This tastes quite nice, she admitted. Thank you. You're very welcome, Sonic said with a small bow. I live to serve. Chapter 22, Chemistry. There was some actual evidence that tea, herbal or otherwise, could have an effect on a human body which would lead to an effect on the human mind. Ivil was quite certain that her brain lacked any chemistry that could be impacted by any amount of tea, and yet she still found herself relaxing as the ritual carried on. Sonic had poured them all a second cup, this time with less fanfare, and the discussion had turned towards a somewhat contentious topic. Personal political beliefs. I never understood it, Ivil said. It's a waste of time, and you know that the votes don't matter. The votes don't. Aurora sat up in her seat and pointed right at Ivil. Yours, alone, might not, but it's the weight of votes that matter. The political apparatus only exists because of the will of the people. And the will of the people needs to be aimed. It's not just about voting on an issue, it's about making yourself heard in a calm, rational way, and also seeing what your co-citizens think as well. Yes, sure, but do you know how few people actually vote at all? Ivil asked. Some time ago, when Mars was still young as a nation, it had tried to adopt a true democracy system. Every citizen of age and of sound mind had a vote. Votes came up almost on a weekly basis, covering a wide range of subjects and issues. Essentially, every action and piece of legislation passed by the civilian government was only passed by vote. With a few trusted intelligences observing the voting procedure, there had only been a few historical moments of fraud or duplicity. Which didn't matter, in Ivil's opinion, because of two large reasons. And besides the fact that only 1 in a few 100,000 people actually vote on anything, the real reins of power aren't in the hands of the civilians. It's all in the military. Aurora crossed her arms with a humph. That's a Mars problem. You've let too much power fall into the hands of the army, and not enough is retained with the people. But even setting that aside, I think that the full right to vote is still important. It adds legitimacy to the government and its actions. Actions which only matter as long as no one truly powerful steps in, Ivil added. Aurora raised her head, displaying her nostrils at Ivil. Do you truly think that anyone is powerful enough to really stand against the bulk of what humanity has to offer? Individually, a person alone might be weak, but by participating in the growth of their nation they create something more powerful than themselves. That wouldn't matter to any one of the emperors, Ivil said. Aurora rolled her eyes and leaned back in her chair. Arguments like these always devolve when those three are mentioned. I don't know, Ivil said. I think it's telling that the three greatest powers all have an emperor. And that those same emperors aren't tied to the political powers of the nations they represent. That's probably for the best. At least you can recognize that stripping the people's power and giving it to one sole person would be tyrannical, Aurora said. Oh, no, I think it's best because I firmly believe that at least 2 out of the 3 emperors are massive pieces of, well, best not to say in polite company. Aurora blinked, then broke out into giggles. She relaxed some, her shoulders dropping and some of the tension leaving her. Ivil enjoyed the sound of her laughter, though, if she were being honest with herself, she'd enjoyed Aurora's passion too. So, only 2 out of 3? Aurora asked. Does that mean you don't have an issue with one of them? I have a soft spot for the Empress of Mars, Ivil admitted. She didn't dislike herself, most of the time. Aurora shook her head. You would. You shouldn't believe all of that Martian propaganda about her. She's as rotten as the rest. Sonic chose that moment to cough, causing both Ivil and Aurora to jump and turn her way. Ivil had almost forgotten that the tech mate was even in the room with them, and it seemed the same for Aurora. Are you well? Aurora asked. Did you choke on? She glanced at Sonic's untouched food and tea. Did you choke? I'm well. Forgive me, Sonic said. Though, we might want to consider starting the end rituals for this session. I believe I hear Missy and the captain coming this way. No sooner had she finished did Missy step into the room. She paused by the entrance, taking the 3 of them in for a moment before dismissing them and moving to the head of the room where a small navigation console sat. Is something the matter? Ivil asked. Missy was moving with alacrity. On a ship that was already underway, there were few things that should cause the crew to want to move quickly. One of those was the turn and burn that they'd eventually have to execute, but they were well over a week shy of that maneuver. Every other scenario that popped into Ivil's mind was more dire than the last. Nothing you need to worry about, Missy said. She sounded distracted even as she said it. The woman locked eyes on the navigation computer's screen, then tugged the seat out, set, and pulled a cord from the computer. A moment later it was wired into the base of her skull, and she was glaring at the machine. Ivil frowned, then schooled her features. Aurora and Missy were here and accounted for. They were as safe as could be. 26 might not be. With a twist of her will, her senses expanded, encompassing all of the hell together and several kilometers of empty space beyond in an instant. Sonic glanced her way, but kept mum as Ivil took in the ship and all of its occupants. There was more rust than she'd imagined, and several parts on the ship that were rattling in disconcerting ways, but not serious damage. 26 was in her room, fiddling with some small part on her workbench. The rest of the crew was spread around, working or cooking. She pulled her attention back to herself and let out a small breath. Everything was fine. Everything that she could perceive without giving anything away, in any case. "What's the matter?" she asked, this time with less give. "Fuck," Missy said plainly as she unhooked herself and stood. "Stay here." She left, heading back into the cockpit and tugging the door shut behind her. "That's concerning," Aurora said. "I'm sure it'll be fine," Ivil said. She wanted to do something, of course. These last couple of days had been strangely passive. She was used to either taking direct action, or being on the path to do so, but right now she had been forced to sit back and wait. It was a bizarre change of pace. There was motion in the cockpit, Missy and the captain arguing over something in hushed tones. Ivil was preparing to listen and when Aurora stood and moved over to the navigation computer. She fished out the same wire Missy had used, then squinted at it. "This thing is ancient," she said. "Were you going to plug yourself into the ship's systems without permission?" Ivil asked. "I have good ice," Aurora said. "I'd be fine. I can't imagine the hell together has great security. Then again, I suppose it's protected by obsolescence." "May I?" Sonic asked as she stood, brushed down the front of her outfit, then swept over to the console. Her mask tilted to the side and she plucked the wire away, slipping it under the mask. Ivil and Aurora both watched as the tech maid stood very still for some long moments. "Ah. We are being chased," Sonic replied. 3 ships. All of larger tonnage, on vectors that will have them catching up to us within 6 hours. "What kinds of ships?" Ivil asked. Could it be Mars? Though she'd imagined that they'd be more subtle about their pursuit if they tried. The hell together's sensor suite is about as old as everything else, I'm afraid, Sonic said. "Well, give us what you have, at least," Ivil suggested. "No ifs on any of the 3 ships." "No, wait, one of them is a cargo freighter registered in series, but its ID's mass and the suggested mass reading from the sensors don't add up. 2 of them are going to arrive earlier than the 3rd. No weapons readouts, but I don't think this system could do that." "Pirates," Aurora said. She leaned back, hands falling to her sides. "They're pirates. From series. Well, that'll spice up the trip, won't it?" Ivil asked. Chapter 23, Pirates. The average space pirate belonged to a specific category of the insane. They were not the average sort of mad. No, their sickness was one of the wallet as much as it was one of the mind. They were business people with a specific job: take shit, sell it. The shit wasn't theirs, but that wasn't their problem. They didn't even need to pay taxes. A spaceship, even an old junker like the hell together, was worth a few million on the market. Cargo ships tended to leave 1 or 2 containers a little loose when flying through the belt, just in case. These could be jettisoned as a sort of tax to lure away pirates. That was, if the pirates weren't after the money that could be made in the human trade. Hostages could be worth a fortune. The 3 ships after them were pirate ships from beam to bow. These weren't your grandpa's pirate ships. Old things cobbled together from modified freighters. These were built for a trouble. Where the average ship had armor designed to take a micrometeorite, these had foot-thick steel plates. They bristled with armaments like a gun salesman at a convention. When a talk thrust, ships like the hell together had engines tacked onto their asses like a last-minute addition. These 3 were nothing but engine. They had games like a runaway model. Between the guns and the engines and the armor, there wasn't much room for anything else. That was fine. They weren't meant to be a live-in, they were meant to take lives. Ivil was splitting her attention between the going-ons in the cockpit and the 3 approaching ships. The hell together's computer might have been ancient, but it could calculate vectors well enough, and it was spot on when it predicted their demise. In just over 3 hours, the pirates would be on them like back alley muggers. "This isn't so bad," she said. That had the crew and passengers shutting up and turning her way. Ivil found herself the center of everyone's attention. And it was everyone, because there wasn't a single person on the Hell Together who wasn't crammed into the cockpit. "What do you mean?" 26 asked timidly. Ivil found herself more comfortable now than she'd been over the past couple of days. There was violence coming her way, and being in the path of violence was her spot. They are going to catch up to us soon, which means that they're doing slow down burns already. If their plan was to kill us, then the first we learn about them, especially with this ship's lacking ability to see anything, would be when we got struck by a missile. Ivil had seen it often enough, an unaware convoy getting struck from the black by a missile on a ballistic course. It was Space Warfare 101. So, we're only alive because they... What, when a buzz by us? Donnie asked. No, Aurora said. They are here for hostages. Now everyone was looking at her, especially the captain. I'm assuming you expect to be one of those? She asked. Aurora nodded slowly. Yes. Truthfully, I expect that I'm the only politically worthwhile person here. No offense meant, of course. Perhaps Miss Vil as well, and the tech maid would be valuable. Only because she has a few cores, Missy said. She has cores. 26 gasped. Her eyes, as round as saucers, turned to Sonic and locked on. That's all cool. I've never met a core user. What do yours do? 26, Missy said. Not the time. Oh, right, impending death, sorry, 26 said with a wince. Sonic shrugged. It's fine. Curiosity doesn't hurt. Miss Sterlingworth, are you certain the pirates are after us because they are aware of your presence? It could be random chance, Aurora said. Captain, is this ship carrying anything valuable? No, the captain said. Freeze-dried goods, some hydroponics parts. A single crate of postage. Nothing that'll make pirates turn their attention our way. It's a pretty light run, all things considered. The Hell Together's been targeted a few times. Usually when they ask us to drop our cargo we jettison whatever's cheapest, then burn hard. But no demands this time, Ivil said. Not a squeak, Hawk muttered. He was sitting by the combs, as if waiting for it to ring with a call from the pirates. In that case, what are our options? Ivil asked. We try to run, we keep on course and let them reach us, or we fight back, the captain said. Flight, surrender or fight, Missy grumbled. I don't like any of those options, but realistically, there's little we can do. If we surrender, what are the odds they'll blow us up once they've got the lady? Donnie asked. Aurora shot him a look that might very well be able to kill, but the man didn't have any brains to broil, so he missed it entirely. We're not surrendering, Miss Sterlingworth, Ivil said. At the moment, she ranked Aurora at the top of her list of potential romantic interests. Though if 26 continued to be so cute she might make up the difference. Missy was in a cold third, and Hawk was quickly falling behind. In any case, as much as Ivil appreciated her current cover and the vague anonymity it provided, she was more than willing to discard it to ruin the day of some pirates. She wasn't going to break her cover on purpose, not if she could avoid it, but if the time came to make a choice, there would suddenly be fewer pirates haunting the solar system. What will happen if they do reach us? 26 asked. She sounded much smaller than usual. Ivil wanted to hug her. They'll either send demands over short-range comms, or shoot out the engines, the captain said. Then it's either aborting, in which case we might get gunned down, or they'll pin the ship to one of theirs and drag us back to their base. Do we know where that is? Ivil asked. No, the captain said. Yes, Missy and Sonic said at the same time. The cockpit filled with more awkward silence. Missy, who was sitting on one of the consoles, folded a leg up and crossed her arms onto her knee. Go on, she said. Sonic nodded. I studied what the Ordo had about the route between Ceres and Jupiter before boarding the Hell Together, she began, her slightly tinny voice echoing through the bridge. That included known pirates, their area of influence, and the location of their bases of operation. At least, those that are known. You ID'd them too, huh? Missy asked. Sonic gestured to the next room over, where they'd looked at the distant, fuzzy image of the pirate ships. The vessels are Dominator-class fast attack frigates. A series pattern design, evolved from an Earth Alliance design. They are, at most, 36 years old, though the model is still being produced to this day. It's a popular design. Speedy pirate ships, yeah, Donnie said. If it's common, how did you guess where they're from? Hawk asked. I'd like to know the same, the captain said. The tech mate gestured in the vague direction of the ships. All three of them are painted in blue and red. There is only one pirate group that operates within this area, uses those colors, and uses that kind of ship. The Convent Valkyries, Missy said. Ah. Well, that's not so bad, Donnie said. He bumped his elbow against Hawk. All ladies pirates. Kinda hot, no? They castrate any man they capture, Missy continued. Donnie's smile fell, and so did his blood pressure, judging by how white he went. They are an elite force. As elite as pirates can be, Sonic said. Usually they track down big targets for big pay. Large cargo haulers, even those with escorts. Some military vessels, some diplomatic. They've hunted bounty hunters and cruise ships. They only take a few targets down every year, but they're always big. The Hell Together is not exactly a big target, Ivil said. Aurora took a deep breath, then let it out. It's me. It's definitely me. Why? 26 asked innocently. Aurora looked around, then shook her head. The event I'm going to has very important political ramifications. There are billions of dollars on the line. More than enough to attract someone who'd be willing to pay some pirates to stop me. They are trying to capture, not kill. At least as far as we can tell, Ivil said. The Convent Valkyries are known to double-cross clients, usually after their work was successfully accomplished, Sonic said. I don't know whether that'll be a factor or not. So, what, we just get grabbed, then die? Donnie asked. We don't know, the captain said. It'll depend a lot on how they decide to act. What we won't do is surrender so easily. The Hell Together has some options. Their base is close. It's not too distant from this part of the belt, Sonic confirmed. Then it's likely they'll drag us back. We might find an option along the way, the captain said. She didn't sound so certain, and Ivil saw the way she eyed Aurora. She suspected that if the captain had to choose between her ship and crew and Miss Sterlingworth, then Aurora might soon find herself tossed to the pirates. Chapter 24, Meet the Freebooters. They started as pacifists. An entire colony, abandoning Earth to look for their fortunes in the stars, or at least, in the asteroid belt, because that was as far as they made it. The convent, like all the religious fanatics to make it out into space, were particularly practical. They believed in technology, they didn't have any major superstitions that would keep them down, and they were relatively open to trade and discussion with others. Their faith was, for the most part, based on the Druidic. A love for nature which turned into a desperate need to escape Earth. The irony wasn't lost on them. And so they settled in the belt. Devout pacifists, working together to form a peaceful little community that wanted to mind its own business, convert the occasional person tired of the grind, and whose primary faith revolved around a set of simple tenets. The first was the simplest and most potent: no man shall bear arms against another man. That didn't work out so well for them, not when their new home was close to the burgeoning center for piracy that was Ceres. A whole colony of people that were unable or unwilling to fight back? That was like putting a hobbled rabbit in a pen with starving wolves. And so the convent almost died. Almost. The rule was no man shall bear arms. That said nothing about an angry self-proclaimed witch with a stolen assault rifle and her 20 pissed-off girlfriends. The convent's home had turned into a safe space for pirates to come and rest. They'd steal what they wanted, bully the locals, and generally treat them all like shit. They got used to treating the station like a second home. They let their guard down. In the space of a week, the convent turned into a space no pirate wanted to visit. Not when every previous pirate had their flanced corpses draped across the station like garlands on a tree. From there, the convent grew to be some of the most fearsome bounty hunters, pirates, and freebooters in the system. That was what the Hell Together was dealing with. The third generation of people who'd become the most vicious sort of pirate, not because they wanted to, not because of greed, but out of plain necessity. The crew and passengers argued in circles for the full 3 hours before the pirate ships were right on top of them. Ivil kept to herself in that time, just watching the tensions rise while contributing nothing to prevent it or push that rise. Instead, she enjoyed watching the reactions of everyone. Aurora had gone on the defensive, and seemed increasingly waspish. 26 grew more and more despondent, and Missy was growing more casual to the idea of tossing Aurora to the wolves. That high tension might have been why everyone jumped as the comms panel beeped to tell them of an incoming message. The captain walked over and stared. "It's a tight beam, from the lead ship. IFF displays as the Amelia Earhart." "Are you going to answer?" Missy asked. The captain hesitated. "Clear the room," she said. "I'd rather not," Ivil replied. It had the captain's hackles rising, but it also put her in the unenviable situation of having to negotiate with a crowd. Ivil suspected that if it came to it, the captain would sell Aurora to keep her ship and crew in one piece. It was a lot harder to sell someone to pirates when they were in the room. The captain adjusted the little camera linked to the comms panel, sat down, then accepted the call. The screen filled with fuzz for just a moment before the call connected properly. The person on the other end immediately gave Ivil pause. She was a woman, maybe a few years older than Ivil herself. Long blonde hair tied neatly so as to be out of her face, and wearing a white and gold jumpsuit with armored shoulders. The front of it was slipped down, revealing a lot more than was strictly necessary to reveal. Not that Ivil minded, in the moment. "Oh good, you answered," she said. Her voice was husky, a faint purr at once alluring and menacing. She'd spoken 4 words, and already Ivil had the impression of a cat that liked to play with its meal. The captain swallowed. "I'm the captain of the Hell Together," she replied. "I don't imagine this is all a misunderstanding, and you're just saying hello as you slip by." The pirate chuckled. "I'm afraid not, Captain. I'm Convent Captain Rouge Herring, and you're my delicious little prey. This is a courtesy call. Don't try to run. It'll just mean that we have to blow your engines, and that'll make everyone's life more complicated. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to fully shut down your engines, and you're going to slave your maneuvering thrusters to my ship." "What are you planning on doing?" the captain asked. "Sweetie, I'm going to do whatever I want. And so are you. What I want, that is." She leaned forwards, almost spilling out of her jumpsuit, but soon enough Ivil was focused on her smile. "You do what I say, and you might come out of this in one piece, okay?" The line went dead. The captain leaned back into her seat. She didn't move. Missy did in her stead. "Fuck!" she shouted before punching the side of a console on the other side of the bridge. The bridge was otherwise quiet while the screen crackled and popped. Missy looked around, then stomped out of the bridge. "Should we?" Donnie started. "You have that old gun of yours, still?" the captain asked. "Yeah," he said. "Might be a good time to find it." He nodded, then left as well. 26 hesitated, then with a sigh, she moved over to the console that Missy had punched, opened the panel on its side up with a twist, and started to look at the wires within. Ivil wasn't sure what the value of fixing that now would be, but she didn't tell 26 not to bother. If it kept her busy, then it was for the best. "We're going to fight," the captain said. "I didn't bring any weapons," Ivil replied. "But I'll help where I can." "As will I," Sonic added. The captain nodded, and soon Hawk was sent to scrounge up what weapons he could. 26 continued to tinker quietly in the corner. She was breathing hard, on the verge of tears. Ivil started to approach her, but was stopped by Sonic. "Ma'am," Sonic muttered. She was keeping the conversation between them, manipulating the sound so that only the two of them would be able to hear. "Yes?" Ivil muttered. "What do you plan on doing?" Ivil considered it for a moment. I was planning on waiting to see. That pirate was attractive. Sonic made a sound that might very well have been a sigh. But she's also a pirate. I'm not too keen on their ilk. On the other hand, this ship is not ideal. I wouldn't mind seeing where all of this leads, but if the time comes where the potentials are actually threatened, then I'll step in. You could take them out now, Sonic pointed out. Easily. But I don't want to. Not yet, Ivil said. Sonic nodded slowly, then stepped back, allowing Ivil to move past. If it comes to it, though, could you keep an eye on everyone? It would be a shame for them to die. Of course, Sonic replied. Ivil walked over to 26, then she gingerly reached out and touched the younger woman on the shoulder. 26 jumped, then blinked up at Ivil. Her eyes were a little watery, and definitely worried. Are you alright? Ivil asked. 26 nodded. Yeah. Just. Missy broke something. Usually it's Donnie that breaks things. I don't know if I can fix it. Ivil glanced at the console. The wires within looked burned, and she caught a faint odor of melted plastic in the air. A short circuit? That seemed unlikely, but then the held together was a junker, so perhaps it wasn't all that surprising. Do you need help? I need to rewire it, 26 said. It's easy enough. Ivil had the impression that 26 wasn't actually worried about the console. It would have been foolish of her, and everything she saw pointed towards 26 being clever. Would you like some help? I'll manage, 26 said. She just stared at the mess of wires, not moving. Finally, she reached towards it, but her hands were trembling, and she dropped them. I don't like it, she said. I see, Ivil replied. What if I promised that you'd be safe? 26 chuckled darkly. Thanks. I don't know if that would actually help any. But thanks. Just stick close. No one will hurt you while I'm around. And maybe if everything goes right, we'll come out of this in better shape than we started. That's certainly happened to me a couple of times. Thanks, 26 said again. Really, I'm just worried. And that's natural. There's a lot to be worried about. I don't know about this old ship, but you, at least, I can keep safe. I promise. And that's a promise that's worth more than you might imagine. Chapter 25, Velocity. The three emperors might have been the de facto rulers of the solar system, but the true king of the universe? That was velocity. To a layperson, something moving at a relative speed of a meter a second might seem like a joke. To a spacer, it was a nightmare. In the vast emptiness of space, speed was as good as mass when it came to ruining your day. There was a reason that even with near-magical technological advancements, the humble bullet was still prized by everyone who wanted their neighbor dead. That's why Ivil was moderately impressed as the pirates came in close and one of the ships swooped in and captured the hell together. It was a beautiful maneuver, the ship slowing down just a few kilometers away, matching their velocity and almost matching their heading so that the two ships came in closer in the span of a dozen minutes. The pirate ship adjusted its flight with maneuvering thrusters, then collided with the hell together like a bowling ball landing in a pit full of feathers. There was a loud crash, then an uncomfortable crunch as the hell together was grabbed. 26 whimpered at the noise, and Ivil could imagine why. That sounded like an expensive amount of damage. Then the pirates called again. This time there was no video, and the speaker was some uninteresting nobody that Ivil tuned out. They were to get into crash seats now, or forever be turned into pieces. The hell together had enough seats in the bridge for everyone, even if it meant that Aurora had to sit in front of the communications console. They were strangely, oppressively, quiet as they all sat in the unfolding crash seats and buckled themselves in. The pirate ship took control over the hell together's systems, slaving them to their own, then they were turned around. There was little warning as, a minute later, the pirate ship did a hard slow-down burn that had the entire crew pressed into their seats. It wasn't as intense of a burn as what they'd used to accelerate. Probably because the pirates were aware of how foolish such a hard burn would be when only connected to a ship via some flimsy supports would be. That did mean that to change their path, They'd need to burn for a lot longer. Ivil shifted in her seat, making herself comfortable. She was aware that the others weren't enjoying it nearly as much. A hard burn that only lasted an hour or two was one thing to experience, a softer burn that still pressed them into their seats for several hours. That was a whole other ordeal, and it seemed as if the crew, passengers, and ship weren't appreciating it all that much. She heard things snapping and breaking deeper in the ship. The Held Together wasn't living up to its name at the moment. The burn ended as suddenly as it had begun, but before anyone could unstrap from their seats they were spun around. Then the burn resumed, this time pushing from the other direction. And immediate speed up and slow down, which could only mean that the pirates were rushing to get them back, and probably didn't care much about their own fuel consumption. The turn took a toll on the ship. More parts snapped and crunched. Ivil expanded her attention and felt an uncharacteristic pang of pity, specifically for 26. The ship wasn't enjoying the pirates' treatment of it. Ivil sat back and relaxed. It might have seemed uncharacteristic for her to be so calm while doing so little, but the reality was that she had long grown used to inaction. Even when she wanted to move at her own pace, the realities of grand distances meant that at best, she could rush ahead and start trouble a day or two before reinforcements arrived. Being so fast all on her own was an advantage, but so was showing up with an entire fleet as backup. For a long part of her career, she'd been a threat that was easily dismissed. One person, no matter how powerful, was still just one person. Some people couldn't appreciate the level of threat she posed. They were far more respectful with the might of Mars at their doorstep. That had changed as she became one of the three emperors, but it had taken a while to reach that level. The slowdown didn't last as long as their ramp-up, though there was a moment at the end where they boosted much harder and Ivil heard almost everyone on the bridge grunt as they were crushed into their seats with no warning. Finally, they slowed to something more reasonable. The deceleration was still noticeable enough that they were being pushed back, but it wasn't nearly that bad. Missy reached to the console before her and tapped a few things. The screen at the front of the bridge turned on, showing them an image of empty space. Or nearly empty. Missy zoomed in on something in the center, a small, distant white speck that might have been one of the stains on the screen. As she zoomed in, the form became more obvious. A station, embedded into the side of an asteroid, with several dozen long sections reaching out of it, and two large rings in its center. There were some 24 ships docked at the station already, and a small patrol of them hovering nearby. "Is that our pirates' hideout?" Ivil asked. "Looks like it," Missy replied. The colors were right. Lots of reds and blues. "We need to decide what to do. We negotiate, and we hope," the captain said. "We've slipped out of tougher situations before, I'm sure we can make it out of this." Ivil glanced at the captain, noting how she was gripping the arms of her seat with white knuckles. It was unfortunate, but Ivil didn't expect that the captain would have a ship by the day's end. It had to sting. The Held Together was a generationally owned ship. "We could steal one of their ships," Ivil said. "They certainly have plenty. Some of the pirate ships looked decent enough. There was even a berth on the far side of the station that looked more like a shipyard than anything else. Large mechanical arms were reaching out towards a half-built vessel, assembling it piece by piece. "Where are our escorts?" Sonic asked. "Behind," Missy replied. "Two ships, keeping about 5 kilometers between us and them. We've been getting lock-on signals this entire time. Not that it really matters at this point." Missy looked ready to fight, and Ivil suspected that she wouldn't be taken so easily. But if Missy fought, then it might not end so well for her. Ivil sighed. It was time to make a choice, and she was tired of being held back. So she unbuckled herself from the crashed seat, sat up, then stood. The first to notice was 26, in the seat just next to hers. The girl reached out, as if to catch Ivil, then looked confused as Ivil stood straight, in complete defiance of the pull towards the back of the ship. She tidied up her dress, gave 26 a soft, hopefully comforting smile, then walked up to the front of the bridge and stood before the crew. "Hey, how are you doing that?" Donnie asked. "That's between me and gravity," Ivil replied. She scanned the bridge, then nodded. I'm afraid that this situation has deteriorated too much. My cover will not be safe from this point onwards." "Your cover?" Missy asked. Her eyes were narrowed. As a war mem, she must have once known all there was to know about cover. "Yes," Ivil replied. "I am, as you may have surmised, not an astroarchaeologist." "Are you a soldier?" 26 asked. "From Mars?" Ivil blinked. "No. In any case, seeing as how I don't want most of you to die in the coming conflict, I've decided that I'm going to take charge of things from here on out. I expect everyone to do what they can to follow my lead. I understand that most of you don't have military training or experience with this kind of thing, but I assure you that if you listen I can keep you safe." Aurora was glaring at her. Missy was trying to make her face neutral, but her suspicion was leaking through, and 26 actually looked hopeful. Maybe this was the right move after all, Ivil thought even as she ignored Sonic's sigh. "We'll begin by allowing the pirates to link the ship up to their base. It's the easiest way to ensure that most of the fighting will occur in a tight, controlled environment. Once we've established that we are a threat, I will attempt to negotiate with the leader of these pirates. If all goes well we'll be back on our way to Calypso with no one harmed." "Understood." Chapter 26, Easy Living. Living in space was easy. Keep airing, keep space out, put something between you and the biggest ball of radiation around. Nice and simple. Expensive, but easy to grasp. A kid could figure it out, and they did. Something like 4% of humanity now lived off-world. A small percentage overall, but in actuality, it was a massive number. Most of them lived on stations orbiting planets and moons across the solar system. You wanted a station? Pick a large, predictable rock, and get building. People raised on stations would often give newcomers a quick crash course on how not to fuck everyone's day up. It was simple too. Don't open airlocks if you don't know what's on the other side. Listen to the station AI if it had one, because it was smarter than you. And if things got heated, fighting happened with fists, knives, and blunt objects. No guns or fancy core powers, because the vacuum of space was a thin wall away, and it didn't care for excuses. Ivil was planning on breaking all of those rules. But first, she needed to convince the crew and passengers of the Hell Together to listen to her, which was proving harder than she'd initially assumed. For one thing, they didn't seem to know who she was. The assumption was that she was some Martian agent of one sort or another. They didn't have the level of respect she was now used to operating with. When Ivil told a ship full of Martians to push their ship into ramming speed and head straight for an enemy force that outnumbered and outgunned them 100 to 1, the response was always a firm "Yes ma'am, who do you want us to ram first, ma'am?" Not this pointless bickering. "I don't like it, but surrendering is still an option," the captain was saying. "Yeah, well, it's not an option if they're gonna take my boys," Donnie replied with a rather crude grab for his crotch. "We can hardly fight," Hawk said with a shake of his head. "But I think, given the option, I'd rather go out in a blaze than just plain go out." Ivil glanced at the more important half of the assembly. Aurora was back from her rooms. She'd switched out of her rather nice dress into a rather nice outfit that was a lot more practical. An off-white jumpsuit, with a jade breastplate covered by a few small panels in a dull brassy color. It was tight around the neck, with a ring for a helmet which she was lacking, and a small mask which was hooked by her belt. She had a small deployable baton at the small of her back as well, and a breathing system in the middle of her back. It was the upsole version of the typical uniform worn by a pilot. The kind of thing meant to help with compression issues and designed to survive exposure to the vacuum, but unlike the average pilot's uniform, which was made en masse to fit as many sizes as possible, this one was tailored. The way it clung to her rear was slightly distracting, actually. Next to her, 26 was looking particularly nervous while clutching onto a large wrench. She seemed on the verge of trembling, like a puppy scared of thunder. Ivil cleared her throat. Then she coughed louder and clearer, shutting the discussions up. "Where's the airlock they'll use to break in?" Ivil asked. "At the rear," Missy said. "By engineering." Missy had added a flak jacket over her outfit, and there was a small sidearm tucked under her arm. She wasn't exactly in her war paints, but she seemed a lot more ready for trouble than almost anyone else. "Good," Ivil said. "Captain, I'm going to free your ship. When I contact you again, use the opportunity to run. Dunny and Hawk will stay with you." She glanced at Sonic. "Pendergast will stay on the ship to keep you safe." Sonic nodded. "I can do as much," she replied. "I'm starting to wonder who died and made you the boss," Missy said. "No one died yet, which is why I'm the boss," Ivil said. "In times like these, the person most capable of keeping people alive should be given the authority they need." "No?" Missy eyed her for a good long while, then shrugged. "Well, you're doing something more than quitting." Ivil nodded. She had never done that before and didn't think she was about to start now. 26, Aurora, "Missy, you're with me." "Why?" both 26 and Aurora asked at the same time. 26 looked at Aurora, blushed, then made a small gesture for her to go on. "Why do you want me to come along?" Aurora asked. "Because it'll be that much easier to keep you safe." Aurora frowned. "Is that your mission here?" "I don't have a mission," Ivil said. "I really do just want to keep you safe, and it would be easier to do that if you're near." "And 26, you're too good of a mechanic to leave behind. I know we haven't spent much time together, but I hope you can trust me to keep you safe as well." 26 gulped, but she nodded all the same. "Okay. You've been nice. But these are pirates." "Let me worry about them," Ivil said. The held together shivered as something struck it from the side. It wasn't so hard that anyone lost their footing, just some clamps grabbing onto the hull. The pirates were here, and they were starting to make their way on board. Ivil adjusted her clothes, then started for the back. It took a moment, but soon she was being followed. Missy was behind her, then the other two lingered behind. It didn't take too long for her to find the airlock. It was recessed into the side of the cargo bay, past the small engineering room with cramped access to the underside of an engine and some of the ship's life support systems. The passage to the airlock was just wide enough for two people to walk through shoulder to shoulder. A panel next to the door was flashing, warning that the other side of the airlock was having its air cycled already. "Shit," Missy said. She pulled her gun out, which had 26 and Aurora pausing. "You really intend to fight?" Missy asked. "Yes," Ivil said. "You're not armed." "I'm always armed," Ivil replied. Missy eyed her, then nodded. "Care to share?" "You'll see presently," Ivil said. 26, Aurora, please stay around the corner. Just in case. Missy, don't fire just yet." "Gotcha," Missy said. She moved back and around the bulkhead, then she kicked up and towards the ceiling. So far, they'd all been moving through the gravity-less held together while orienting themselves floor down. That was just how most people thought. But Missy climbed to the ceiling and clung to it, only shoulders and head poking out. If someone shot at her, they'd need to be a crack shot or lucky to hit. The airlock finished cycling, then the panel next to it flashed a query. It wanted to know if they wanted to open the door from their end. A simple precaution, and one Ivil didn't doubt the pirates could work around. She gestured to the panel. The door started to open with a hiss. Air rushed into the held together from the overpressurized airlock. There were 3 women within. Ivil could feel that one of them had a core. Just one, and it seemed to be in use at the moment. She blinked. It was a weak ferrokinetic power. A spoon bender, basically. The door continued to open, and Ivil straightened, holding herself tall and proud in the entranceway. The 3 pirates were wearing spacesuits. Thin ones, with armored plates over their shoulders and chest and legs, and with narrow helmets. Purely military gear, not repurposed equipment like what she expected to see. "Get down!" one of them shouted as she raised a small, stubby gun at her. A shotgun, likely loaded with non-penetrative shells. "No," Ivil said. She flicked her hand to the side and their guns were ripped away. The spoon bender tried to use her power at that moment. It failed. Then the pirates were concerned with something else. Notably, The fact that she was pinching their necks and cutting off the blood going to their heads. All three scratched at their necks. It took a long 10 seconds for them to stop fighting and for them to go unconscious. One of them had unhooked their magnetic boots from the ground and started to float upwards. "It's safe," Ivil said. The women weren't dead, and they'd likely reawaken in a minute or so, but she was keeping an eye on all three. If they started to come back awake, she'd cut their circulation again. 26. Did you want a core? Chapter 27, Unprepared Lions. Piracy didn't exactly go unpunished within the belt, but the issue with actually punishing piracy was twofold. First, it was expensive. The pirates were rich off the booty they collected, and unlike any government, they only had themselves to invest in. Sure, the overall growth and profits might be small compared to that of a proper planetary nation, but they didn't have the worries and bloat of governance to worry about. In that way, they were closer to a conglomerate of disparate companies than a proper political entity. Second was the matter of jurisdiction. Did Mars want Earth moving a fleet around the belt? Fuck no. Would Earth accept Mars wiping out a pirate fleet with their superior navy? Not without whining about it. If no one had rights in the belt, then no one had the right to fight off the pirates either. It was a twisted bit of logic despised by cargo captains everywhere, and easily understood by any career bureaucrat. In the end, it meant that the pirates of the belt were used to things going one way. Their way. They'd prey on those that traversed their corner of space. If you were weak, you were on the menu. Better hope you looked poor or the pirates around you were fat already. They were lions lazing in the migratory path of limp gazelle. Sometimes an elephant would rumble by, and unless the pirates had a big plan in mind or a sponsor in the shadows, they wouldn't go after well-armed convoys. The lions never expected to have their airlock door literally kicked in and for the savannah's equivalent of a safari hunter with an attack helicopter to barge into their home turf. Ivil, the current safari hunter of choice, stretched her back as she walked past the three slump pirates. "You didn't answer," she said over her shoulder. 26 peeked out around the corner, attention going from the men on the ground to Ivil. "Huh?" Ivil pointed to the core user in the bunch. "She has a core. It's nothing special. Some minor pyrokinesis of some sort or another. It's the kind of power that would be useful to a mechanic. And if Ivil knew anything about cores, and she knew everything, then it wasn't the kind of core that would give 26 any noticeable physical changes." "You're just going to give her a core?" Missy asked. "It's a weak one, good to cut your teeth. And 26 seems smart. She might find creative uses for it," Ivil said. "Besides, there's a number of core users here. We'll have plenty to go around." Missy eyed her, then shrugged. "If you want it, 26, she said. I can't have a core." 26 stuttered. "That's for important people." "You're important to me," Ivil replied simply. "You've been friendly and kind so far. And I certainly don't want her need the core." 26 gulped, but she nodded. "That's a big responsibility," Aurora said. It froze 26 on the spot, which didn't stop her from floating forwards a little more under her momentum. What do you mean?" 26 asked. "Having a core puts you ahead of others, whether you want to think that way or not. It can leave you feeling detached from the rest of humanity, in a way. That can be hard to overcome. Worse, some people gain a core and its power and fail to understand that with that power comes a responsibility to use it wisely." Aurora locked eyes with Ivil. "And giving that kind of power to another is also not something so easily done." Ivil nodded, acknowledging the point. "That's a valid argument. But I'm not giving a gun to a child. I'm giving a knife to an adult. It'll be a tool, or a weapon, as she sees fit, but it isn't something she'll fail to use wisely, I don't think. Better to give it to her than to hoard it." Aurora considered that for a moment before shrugging a shoulder. "Very well. So, should I take it?" 26 asked. "Go ahead," Aurora replied. "In the worst case, if you find it unsuitable, then give it back. Missville could sell it for a pretty penny. A core, even a weaker one, was worth its weight in precious metal. More, even. There were only so many of them to go around, and more people who wanted one than there were to share. Not to mention those few like Ivil who hoarded them. She reached down, casually ending the life of the pirate and watching as her core reassembled over her body. It was a tiny thing, no bigger than the joint at the end of her pinky. She plucked it out of the and inspected it. It's a third-generation core, she observed. What's that mean? 26 asked. When you have a core, you can split it. Break it within yourself and extrude a broken replica. That replica will repair itself over time. Sometimes it's months, usually it's years. The copy within the core wielder will heal as well, often over the same time scale. In the end, however, you're left with two copies of the same, or extremely similar, core. This one was the split of a split. That makes it somewhat uncommon. Ivil handed it to 26, who took the small item with reverence. Wow. Wait, doesn't that mean that people could double the number of cores? Exponentially? Yes, Ivil said. At the cost of severely weakening themselves for months or years. It's still a valid if slow way of earning money, as long as you have a core valuable enough to sustain you for the year or more in which it's broken. 26 took a moment to parse that, then nodded. Okay. How do I? Just swallow it, Ivil said. There were better ways. Opening a hole within one's body and shoving it in was preferred, and more accurate at times. But for such a weak core, and one given to someone she didn't want to traumatize, consumption was best. 26 eyed the core. Really? It'll work, Missy said. But 26 tossed the core back and gulped audibly. Sorry, what? I was gonna say that I'd clean it first, Missy said. They are usually somewhat sterile, Ivil said. Somewhat, sure, Missy muttered with a shake of her head. 26 glanced between the two, then touched a hand to her chest. Am I supposed to feel something? Weird new senses or whatever? You'll notice in a moment, Ivil replied. She reached down and started to search the women, looking not for a gun or a weapon but for. She found it, and ripped it from the belt of the corpse. A small pouch, for shotgun shells. She emptied it, then handed it over to 26. The young woman had just enough time to look at the bag in confusion before her face went green and she vomited into the bag. First time's always the worst, Ivil replied. There was a reason ingestion wasn't popular for more experienced core wielders. Missy stepped up and started rubbing circles in 26's back. There, she muttered. We can give you a couple of minutes, Ivil said. These three will probably have to report back sooner than later, but I doubt the pirates will act out so soon. I don't know about that, Missy said. Their Missouri is to have a group come in, secure the entrance, then open it up for more troops. Then once they have a squad or two in the ship, one secures the main objective, another secures the ship. Ah, so they'll be expecting these three to report right away, then, Ivil said. You have some experience with this kind of thing? Missy eyed her, then nodded. Some, she admitted. Ivil considered her next move while 26 continued to cough and sputter. The girl would be fine. Ivil could feel the core settling already. Soon it would break apart and reconfigure itself in her head as that kind of core was apt to do. It would probably be a few hours before 26 could even start to use it. More likely it would take a day or two. She refocused on the issue at hand. The pirates. All right, she said. Aurora, Missy, 26, please stand on this side of the airlock. I'm going to cycle it. In the meantime, strip these three of whatever you might want. Once I'm done on the other side, I'll cycle the airlock again. If it opens up empty, that's your all clear. Understood. You're just going to dive into the lion's den? Missy asked. Lions aren't prepared for the likes of me, Ivil replied. We're going to have a talk, Missy shot back. I think I'd like to be part of that, Aurora added. 26 swallowed, and looked between the two. Hey, Evelyn's not a bad guy, she said. Well, that was one of the most heartwarming things Ivil had ever heard just before she walked out to commit some extreme violence. Chapter 28, Easy Meal. The kindly pirates of the convent were expecting an easy meal. The held together wasn't a great catch. It was like bagging a rabbit when you wanted a deer. To the pirates, this rabbit in particular looked like it had a limp, a missing ear, and was maybe sickly before they even caught it. The usual process was simple. Get in the ship, clear out the crew, toss those that survived in cages. The VIPs got their own little boxes, or the airlock, depending. Sometimes the client wanted a VIP dead, and there was no dead quite like ejected from an airlock then fired at with an anti-ship gun. Once cleared of crew and passengers, the captured ship was scoured clean. That involved a team of expert mechanics and engineers and deconstruction specialists. They even had an explosive ordnance specialist, in case the ship was booby-trapped. They could strip a ship of cargo and anything worth removing in a matter of hours. Then, if the ship was still in a condition to fly around, the next step was moving it to a berth in orbit around the station. There was a market for ships obtained via less than legal means. If the ship wasn't flight-capable, or not worth the trouble to repair, it would be up to the crew of the convent to decide what to do with it. Some were turned into weapons platforms to protect the station. Others were rendered down for scrap. Ivil imagined that the fate of the held together was supposed to be something along those lines. The vessel was far too old to be worth repairing. The choice wouldn't matter, in the end, because the people who were supposed to make that choice would soon be otherwise occupied. The outer airlock slid open on well-oiled mechanisms, and Ivil found herself walking into a relatively large room. The far wall had tool chests and cubbies for equipment on the floor and ceiling. The center had a large window looking into a control room. There were a few doors leading deeper into the station, and a few bays where some smaller industrial craft were parked. A set of barricades were placed just outside of the airlock, giving the waiting team of pirates a place to find cover if things went sideways for them. The crews deeper in the room, hanging out with coffees in hand, didn't look like the usual piratical sort. Just normal shift workers that could have been on any old dock. "Oh, shit," one of the pirates behind the barricade said as she brought her gun up. Another, with a flashier, better decorated spacesuit, gestured towards Ivil. "Hands in the air." She barked. "No," Ivil said. Without an audience that she cared about, she didn't mind cutting loose a little. A gun went off, but its round stopped long before striking her. Then the gun, and the others in the hands of her assailants, were crushed into small bundles of scrap metal. The pirates screamed, some of them because they still had fingers and to trigger guards of those guns when they were crushed. She didn't have much sympathy for them. Still, just in case that the pirate woman she'd overheard earlier was important, she decided to spare their lives and merely cut off their ability to pump blood into their brains for a few moments. Minor brain damage and some broken fingers was hardly worth making a fuss over. Ivil stepped past the barricades, then glanced to the far end of the room where the waiting mechanics were now scrambling to escape. She lit them. Her interest was fixed on the command room above where someone was calling for help over what was probably an intercom system linked through the station. That was where she'd need to be, then. Ivil hopped forwards, allowing the lack of gravity to finally let her float off the floor. She knew that there had to be a way around and into the command room. Her way through the inch-thick glass was much faster. A few more pirates shot at her with small arms. Ivil rendered the bullets safe by draining them of kinetic energy long before they struck her. When they did, it was with the force of a particularly lazy mosquito. Not even enough to crease her blouse. The pirates in the command room were soon clutching at their throats and floating out of their seats as she bid them good night. Most of them were in jumpsuits, but a couple had button-up shirts and were dressed well enough that they could have fit in the average office. She supposed that even pirates needed comptrollers and accountants and people working the kind of system that didn't involve shooting up innocents. Ivil found the communication system off to one side. It was a computer linked into the entire station's network. The touch screen had labels across dozens of stations across the ship. At the moment, it was linked to a central location in the main block of the station, right in the center of it all. "Vagrant? Vagrant, come in." Ivil's eyebrows perked. She intended to reply, but not just yet. First she walked over to another station, This one the navigation assistance station where one of the now unconscious workers had been sitting. The computer there had the beacons and controls designed to guide ships into the berth they held together was not occupying. It also had systems for 2 more berths further out. It seems as if the entire arm of the station was controlled from here. She imagined that the same layout could be found elsewhere, then, with each one of the arms of the station having its own small control center linked to the station's central hub. It was a design philosophy that she'd seen before, and it made a certain amount of sense. More even, if she considered that the various pirate crews using the station might not all agree with each other. If they all had strong independent streaks, then it only made sense to keep them a little apart. She tapped on the navigation console, backing out of the current menu, then frowned at the software's layout. It was not what she was used to, which was the rather cluttered but intuitive layout used on Martian ships. This was some bespoke software, and it took her a moment to find a local map with IFF locators and a list of nearby ships. The 2 vessels that had followed the hell together to the station were docked already, both of them linked to one of the arms connected directly with the center of the station. The one she was at now was on the fringes. She'd have to walk some ways to get to the main part of the station. Still, it made it far more likely that the attractive pirate captain she'd spoken to earlier was important, if she was able to dock her ship right to the center. That was usually how this kind of place's hierarchy worked out. A pirate started to cough as he regained consciousness, and Ivil idly forced the air out of her lungs as she returned to the station-wide communication system. She picked up a headset from one of the pirates and placed it on her head distastefully. She didn't like having a microphone that had been so close to someone else's mouth near hers, but needs must. "Hang on, Vagrant, we have a team coming in from Angel Squadron," someone said over the line. "Don't bother," Ivil replied. "Instead, I would much rather have you link me to the captain of the..." I believe it was the Amelia Earhart? "Who is this?" "Never you mind," Ivil said. "Link me to the nice captain, if you would please. I think her name was Rouge Herring. I think. I'm operating in the dark here, so to speak." Ivil paused, then sighed as she felt the pressure in the room changing. Someone was venting this entire section of the station. It was actually a valid tactic. There was a reason that most people couldn't use traditional guns on a station or a ship in the vacuum of space, or use core-given powers that were too destructive. "That won't work on me," Ivil said into the microphone. She didn't care that the quickly dissipating air meant that her voice couldn't carry. It did so anyway because she told it to. The pirates and support crew left in the room slowly started to die out. She noted that none of them had any cores to collect, which was really too bad, but not unexpected. Then the screen lit up before her, and Ivil found herself staring into the burning, angry eyes of that rather attractive pirate captain she was intending to meet very soon. "Why hello," Ivil said with as kind a smile as she could manage. "I've been looking forward to talking to you." Chapter 29, Absolutely not. Ivil considered herself a picky person. It wasn't out of control. She merely liked some things, disliked others, and was vocal and violent about her choices. She wouldn't suffer incompetence for long, but she didn't kill incompetence either. She merely suggested, politely, that they leave her presence. When she still needed to eat, she would gravitate towards the food she enjoyed. It was all perfectly reasonable. Yes, she was impossibly powerful, but that didn't mean that her desires and limits were impossible as well. Merely more difficult to work with. So far, the 3 candidates she had met all fell within the broad enough range of acceptable for Ivil. They were attractive enough, in their own ways, smart, acted in a reasonable fashion, and she found herself enjoying her time with them thus far. She was well prepared to judge this 4th candidate. The pirate captain stared at Ivil through what looked like a small drone camera floating ahead of her. She was glaring rather fiercely. It suited her, made her seem more ferocious and dangerous. "You're not Sterlingworth," she said. "Did the little princess bring a bodyguard?" "No," Ivil said. "My name is Ivil. I was on board the Hell Together, now I'm enjoying some time in your station." I'm afraid that with the herb being vented, all the effort I took to avoid killing your friends here was for naught. So, some punk bitch with a few cores and some attitude, huh? Ivil smiled. Something like that. I'm curious, what's your dash? The pirate woman paused. She pressed the pad of a thumb against one nostril, then blew hard. A long stream of snot jetted out of her other nostril and shot off in the low-gravity passage she was in. She rubbed the underside of her nose with her sleeve, then resumed glaring at the screen. I'm Pirate Rouge dash, no, Ivil interrupted. I don't care. Please disregard all of my previous good humor. I can't believe I wasted all of this time. What? Ivil was disappointed. In herself, of course, and most of all in this piratical barbarian. What kind of ill-mannered simpleton just did that? She was utterly disgusted, and didn't plan on wasting any more time with these pirates. A stray thought crushed the console before her, and with a sigh, Ivil exited the command room by jumping out of the window and floating herself down to the ground. She glanced up, searching out the cameras dotted across the room, and ripping them apart with force of will. On arriving back at the airlock, she tapped on the communication device on its side, connecting to the Hell Together. Missy, Aurora, 26? She asked. Ah, hello, came 26's reply. It's clear on this side. I'm going to cycle the airlock. The only problem is that they vented the air out from this side, Ivil said. There was a pause before 26 clicked the comms on again. Are you okay? She asked. I'm fine, Ivil replied. We have the, suits from these guys, and we have our own equipment too, but it'll take a while to get suited up, 26 said. Take your time, Ivil said. I'll keep things clear on this end. Are you sure? You could come back in. It'll be safer. Ivil smiled. Safer for me, maybe. But not safer for you. Get geared up, I'll be here when you come back. She felt three figures just past the bulkhead of the Hell Together moving about. They took a while before they split up. One moved towards engineering, another towards the crew quarters, and the last towards the passenger area. It didn't take a genius to figure out which was which. Surprisingly, however, Missy was the first to return. Ivil felt her hesitating by the comms unit, so in that moment of hesitation, Ivil turned and reached her senses out deeper into the station. There was a team of pirates by one of the bulkheads leading into the room she was in. They were preparing to breach, which would, of course, interrupt things. The corridor they were in gained a sudden hole the size of a minivan, and the team was sucked out into the vacuum. That would, she figured, gain her a few minutes. She couldn't go too hard, otherwise the pirates might decide to cut their losses by simply destroying the entire arm, Hell Together and all. The comm unit hissed for a moment as Missy tapped it on. Evelyn? She asked. Ivil reached back and pressed a thumb against the unit on her side. I'm here, she said. We're still in the clear so far. Good, Missy said. She continued to press the comms button, even as she said nothing for a few long seconds. Ivil let her cook, until Missy leaned in closer. What are you? She asked. Just another woman, out here, looking for love and some peace and quiet, Ivil said. Missy chuckled. Cute answer. But really? Martian Special Ops? A retired Valkyrie? I'm a little young for retirement, Ivil said. Then again, so are you. How about a trade? A question for a question. Missy asked. Exactly. You can go first, Ivil said. She grinned. This was an interesting little game. Missy seemed to think about it for a while before her question came through. Are you Martian Special Ops? No, Ivil said. I'm not technically part of the Martian military at all. Technically? Missy asked. That's two questions, Ivil teased. Missy huffed, but didn't press, so Ivil took her turn. You left the lunatics to work on what's probably one of the least luxurious ships in the system. Why? Missy grunted something. You really go for the jugular, huh? She said. It's what's most effective, most of the time, Ivil said. If you're not comfortable. It was a little strange, talking to a woman through a door, and not how she imagined this kind of thing going down. "No, it's fine," Missy said. "I left because I was being fit into a little box. I was good at what I did, but it wasn't all I wanted to do. I knew the captain. Not friends or anything, just met a few times. Took the job here, and it's a dead end of my choosing." Ivil noted how little Missy had actually said about her past, but that was fine. They could continue the game. It was a productive way to learn what she wanted to. "Your turn to ask a question," Ivil said. So, not technically Martian spec ops or military. What's that mean?" "It means that I do what I want, and the kind people of the Martian military complex make sure they're not standing in my way," Ivil said. "Sometimes they'll ask for favors, and I'll help if I feel like it at the time." "Yeah?" Missy said. "So, you're that sort, huh? You look surprisingly human." Ivil knew that Missy had gotten the wrong impression. There were, scattered across the system, some few hundred people who edged into B-class and who weren't directly tied to any government. Free agents. They often had strong bonds to one world or another anyway, because a B-classer was powerful, but it wasn't a monolith. "Something like that," Ivil replied. It was enough, for the moment. Better, even, than Missy knowing who she really was. That would only inspire fear, the likes of which she didn't want to deal with. "Your turn," Missy said. "Wait." She cut off the comms. The reason was obvious to Ivil. 26, who was now much brighter in Ivil's senses, had finished suiting up and ran over. Aurora was on her way back as well. "We're coming out in a few, you'll have to pocket that question for later." "Gladly," Ivil replied. Aurora arrived, and soon enough Ivil backed off and waited for the airlock to cycle. When it finished and opened, Ivil found herself looking over the team stepping out. Missy was in a fairly sleek suit. Old, certainly, and worn at the knees and joints, but well made. She'd grabbed one of the coats from the pirates that had broken into the Hell together, the pockets filled with loose shells for the shotgun hanging behind her by a strap. 26's suit was a mess of patches and spare parts, and it was clearly a size too large, but she had some straps and belts to keep it in snug, as well as a suite of tools strapped to her chest and in a large duffel she tugged after her. Aurora came up behind the two, in a perfectly serviceable light suit, her head covered in a transparent dome over a dark jade suit with a few bronze highlights. The small bean-shaped emblem of Phobos was emblazoned on her chest. "You all look ready," Ivil said. "And you look like someone who should be choking on the lack of air in here," Missy said. "I've got a trick or two for that," Ivil said with a shrug. "So, I had time to think, and I've come up with a simple plan." Chapter 30, Complex. Complex plans were a complex risk. So keep your plans simple. That was the essential way that most successful armed forces conducted warfare for millennia. Then humanity reached the stars, and suddenly old ideas didn't work out so well. This was especially obvious during the first inter-system war. Mars and Earth fought and clawed at each other. Earth trying to reclaim what they thought of as rightfully theirs. Mars fighting for an independence that they thought they had earned. Both sides approached war as a matter of putting simple plans into action. Space, however, was infinitely complex. Soldiers on both sides ran out of fuel and were flung into the void. Both sides had ships run out of food, and soldiers starve in their billion-dollar warships. They discovered, to their mutual horror, that rocks going very fast were very dangerous. So keeping things simple, as a concept, died an inglorious death. Still, there were times where Ivil thought that it was still applicable. "So, what's the plan?" Missy asked. "These pirates are relatively well established," Ivil said with a gesture around herself at the station. This station wasn't top of the line, but it was more impressive than most frontier stations. The pirates were doing well for themselves. So, I imagine that with all of this wealth, they must have a few private vessels that are worth taking. I think it's only fair that we take from those who would take from us. You want to steal a ship?" 26 asked. "I can see many ways that could go wrong," Aurora said. "First of all, how do you intend to steal a ship?" 26 can likely break any security measures on board their ships, Ivil replied easily. Besides, will they really have that many locks in place? Missy seemed able to pilot the Hell together just fine, and whatever we take will likely be generations younger and more responsive. It's not that easy to go from one ship to another, Missy said. You can't do it? Ivil asked. Missy's spine straightened. I didn't say that. Well, there you go then. We find the nicest ship here, clear it out of piratical scum, then leave. Nice and simple. Aurora shook her head. No, not so nice or simple, she countered. The station has defenses, there are ships around it, and lots of pirates on this station. We'll be gunned down. We'll take a ship with good point defense. In any case, I didn't intend to leave the station in any shape to retaliate, Ivil replied. I'm willing to bet that the pirates here are already in a rough state. Punch a few more holes into the station and they'll be too panicked to care about one ship pulling out, and once we're out and in weapons range, we can assist the Hell together by making some noise. That seems kind of dangerous, 26 said. Ivil looked at her. 26? We're invading a pirate outpost. This place is filled to the brim with people who want us all dead or worse. The only safety here is for the few people whom I have decided to protect. 26 smiled slightly. Thank you, she said. You're probably right. I wouldn't mind looking at the engineering on some of these pirate ships. I'll let you pick the ship, Ivil promised. And what happens if we do survive and somehow make it out of here? Aurora asked. Then onwards to Calypso? You had a reason to head that way, no? Aurora paused, then nodded slowly. Yes. I didn't expect you to still want to move that way, but I wouldn't say no to it. On the other hand, we have other options. Less insane ones. Oh. We're now in a position to negotiate. We could ask the pirates to allow us to contact someone from outside. A Martian patrol, maybe. Phobos has its own small fleet as well. It's nothing compared to Mars or Earth, but I'm certain it would measure up to some pirates. Or mercenaries. In any case, we could negotiate for our own release. That'll never work, Missy said. That would mean holding off the pirates for however long it takes for your rescuers to show up. Can't we? Aurora asked. Certainly, Ivil said. But they'll try to sabotage us the entire time. They were willing to vent the air out of this section while living crewmates were in it. They'll be trying a lot worse against us if we sit around and wait. Missy sighed. She's right. If we're going to do something, I'd rather it be proactive and destructive. If you want to call for help, then we might find a place to do that along the way. Ivil reached over and carefully placed a hand on Aurora's shoulder. We'll figure this out. I'm certain that we might find a time or place to put your diplomatic skills to good use. Aurora didn't seem too impressed, but she didn't press the issue. All right. Let's head towards the center of the station. Stay behind me, I'll keep you safe. None of the three looked entirely certain about that, but Ivil didn't mind. She had hardly flexed in front of them yet. If everything went well, she wouldn't need to. Taking the lead, Ivil headed towards one of the bulkheads near the back of the room, the same one the mechanics had fled down a few long minutes ago. Do you think you can cycle the air in the corridor? She asked. We won't want to be in a low-oxygen environment forever. The suits her companions were wearing hardly seemed fit for combat. One puncture and they'd be choking on nothing. That, and while the suits had modern air recyclers and scrubbers, she doubted the efficiency on some of them, and the air tanks they did have the sort that automatically refilled and repressurized in a pressure-neutral environment were all small-capacity tanks. They had, at best, 20 to 30 minutes of breathable air. On arriving at the door, Ivil walked over to the command system next to it, then frowned. It was more unfamiliar hardware. "See, can I?" came 26 from behind her. Ivil stepped aside. "Go ahead. I recognize it," 26 said. "It's Jupiter-made. See the rounded handle? All of the stations around Jupiter have passages that can act as temporary airlocks." "Strange," Aurora said. "No, not really. It's additional redundancy. Because a single point of failure means a lot more pain. Remember the Titan earthquake? That had been a fairly major event, Ivil remembered, a large tectonic motion sometime between the First and Second Inter-System War. Titan had been well on its way to becoming a third system-wide power at the time, but the quake had ripped open several stations. Thousands had died, and the disaster relief was slow in coming. Even now, decades later, the moon hadn't regained its early momentum. Rumor had it that the quake had been triggered by a core wielder. A powerful one. One who wanted nothing more than to slow Titan's growth and prevent a third system power from appearing. At least, that was the common conspiracy theory. Yeah, I can cycle it from here, 26 said. The other side is still pressurized. Do so, then, Ivil said. If we fight in rooms that are at 1 atmo, then they'll likely be a lot more careful with their fire. 26 tapped 2 buttons and flicked a small lever. It all seemed very simple when she did it like that. The room hummed, and there was a faint hiss from the other side of the bulkhead. If they know we're coming, then we'll be meeting some resistance, Missy said. Would this be a good time to come clean with what we can do? Because as much as I like holding my cards close to my chest, I also like not having my chest punched full of holes. Ivil raised her eyebrows. Go on, she said. Missy gave her a look, then shook her head. Sound dampening, and better joints. Those were relatively weak cores, but not entirely useless. They were the kind of cores that the Martian Navy might hand out to would-be Valkyrie to get them started without them having any real power. Missy and Ivil both turned towards Aurora, who stared between the two. What? She asked. If you don't want to reciprocate, that's fine, Ivil said. Aurora's eyes narrowed. How did you know? She asked. I can sense it, Ivil said. You're rich, Missy replied. You seem the sort. Wait, 26 said. Miss Sterlingworth has a core. Aurora groaned. I don't have anything that would be useful here. Nothing? Ivil asked. She sensed at least half a dozen cores in Aurora, maybe closer to 10. I can regulate my body temperature, suppress involuntary reflexes, and see well in the dark. Not night vision, just better vision in the dark. My nails are tougher too. She crossed her arms. Happy? That's all? Ivil asked. We've been purchasing random, cheap, cores for a while. Just that much cost me a fair bit. What about you, Missville? Care to share? No, we don't have time for that, Ivil said.